So tell me a little bit, how did you grow up? How did your parents and your family uh, paved your way to where you're at right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I grew up in a pretty suburban, kind of average suburban household. Um, but my parents didn't, and I think those stories you're telling come from really their childhood. My dad grew up in the Philippines. He was kind of a displaced German Jew, actually, and was born there and grew up there as a child until around 8 and then moved to New York. And so he kind of had these, these habits ingrained in him. And my mom, her parents ran a lamp store in Queens and she grew up there, but both of really modest means. And I think that led to them just building habits that never died. It still exists today. I like to talk about how my mom used to totally embarrass me because she would I'd have friends over for dinner and she'd make pasta and she would, put pasta sauce on it, but then she would put water in the pasta jar, in the sauce jar, sorry, and then she'd shake it around and pour this like watery sauce on top of the regular sauce, um, and then, right, my dad always sucking, making a lot of noises. He sucked all the chicken off the bone, every little bit of it. So, yeah, I mean, we just grew up with that mentality. You cut the mold off cheese, and you use things, until they truly are not edible. Um, but I certainly never thought that I would work on that as an adult. It was actually a total embarrassment as a child. So I always admired Jane Goodall and wanted to work with monkeys in the forest. And I did really focus on environmental science in college. And actually I drilled down as my focus area into energy efficiency because I just felt like it was so silly that we produce all this energy and then like not use it well. And why not be more efficient with how we used energy? Um, and fast forward, I took that same mentality into a project. I became very interested in food as a place, as a kind of a sector to work in when I was on a trip in India and I was living with a family in the Indian Himalayas, and they were really kind of just farming for themselves. And their whole lives changed because of the influence of food and rice, which they couldn't grow there. And it just had me very interested in how food affects so many different things, from just community and livelihoods and lifestyles to environmental issues and things like that. And health. And I came back really wanting to work on food. And I ultimately found myself working on a project with the Natural Resources Defense Council, um, the NRDC, and it was a project on in production. Actually, you work with producers, and we were working with the fruit and vegetable industry and looking at different ways to measure aspects of sustainability in farming. And I was put in charge of the waste group, and they wanted to know, what do we do with our waste, with our plastic? There's a lot of plastic in farming, so it was really looking at that kind of waste. But I started stumbling upon numbers of how much food was going to waste. And I would go back to them and say, oh my gosh, I just read this paper. It says like 40% of food is going to waste. Could that possibly be true? And they would sit back and go, yeah, okay. Yeah, that probably sounds about right. And no one was really very worried about it. And I just went, oh my gosh, this is like energy efficiency, but for the food industry, but nobody's working on it. And here we are, so concerned about how growers are, um, you know, using their water and trying to get them to use 5 or 10% less water. But on the other hand, 40% of the food's not getting eaten. That's crazy. And so that really lit my fire on the issue. And I ultimately wrote a paper back in 2012 that in some ways sparked a lot of the dialogue on the issue. And I've been working on it ever since.